Our Bible word is Psalm 24, verses 7 to 8. Lift up your heads, O you gates, and be lifted up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. So here we have a hymn, and it celebrates God as King. It celebrates His universal kingship. And it's also connected, as we will see, with the ark coming to Jerusalem. And the ark was representative of God's presence. The ark was there with the Israelites as they battled their enemies. So it's this hymn that celebrates God as King. And the psalm consists of three major parts. If you look at the first part, which is verses 1 to 2, it's a hymn that praises the Lord for His establishment of the world and His dominion over it. If we read it, it says, "The earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. For He has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters." So the idea is that God encountered chaos. The physical world was in a state of disorder, and God came and He established order on it so it can be productive and fruitful, plants, animals, and also people. Now the next part is verses 3 to 6. And here it's a liturgy that consists of three parts. And it specifies the condition to be met by those who want to worship the God of creation. So there's interaction, there's questions that is asked, and there are those who answer that question. So the first question that's asked is asked by pilgrims, or maybe a representative, who asks, "Who may ascend into the hill of the Lord? Or who may stand in His holy place?" And now the answer comes, and that's perhaps by a priest. That's in verses 4. So the answer is, "He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to an idol, nor sworn deceitfully," etc. So this is the person or the people who can ascend to God's hill. In other words, Mount Zion, where the temple stood. And now the next verse, verses 6, there's this affirmation of the people who are qualified to ascend. It says, "This is Jacob." And of course, Jacob stands for Israel, the people of Israel. "The generation of those who seek Him, who seek your face." In other words, God's people who have authentic worship, who come to God with sincerity, with authenticity. These are the ones that can ascend to God's hill and worship God in the temple. And now we come to the third part, which is verses 7 to 10. And the imagery in the background is this procession of the Ark of the Covenant being brought to Jerusalem. And we can go read about this in 2 Samuel 6, verses 12 to 19. This is when David conquered the enemies and the tabernacle was brought to Jerusalem. And we must understand the imagery that's also being used here. It speaks of the Lord of hosts, or it speaks of that God is mighty in battle. And go read passages like Numbers 10, verse 36, or Exodus 15, verses 3. It's wherever the Israelites went and they fought their enemies, the Ark of the Covenant was with them. And when the Ark of the Covenant was with them, it helped them to conquer their enemies. At this time, the God of Israel was understood to be like this warrior king. He's a warrior. He fights with the Israelites to conquer the peoples. So if you read verses 7 to 10, have this in your background. Or have this understanding that in the background here is the Ark of the Covenant that's representative of God's presence, who helps the Israelites to conquer their enemies. And now the Ark, after the defeat of the enemies, it's brought to Jerusalem and to take up its rightful place in the tabernacle. And here again, there's this conversation that takes place. There's again this question and response format. So firstly, if you go to verses 7, it's the ark bearers, or as this declaration, "Lift up your heads, O you gates, and be lifted up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. So what they're saying is, do not be afraid. Don't look down and be despondent. He's specifically being addressed here are the gatekeepers or the doorkeepers. And so they are symbolized by the gates or doors that must lift up their heads, metaphorically speaking. Don't be despondent. Look up. The conquering king, the king of the world, God is coming in. Lift up your heads, O ye gates. In other words, you gatekeepers, don't be despondent. Look up because somebody special is coming now. So the question posed by the gatekeepers of the temple is then, who is this King of glory? And then there's a response by the bearers of the ark. And that's from verses 8b to 9 also. It says, the Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Again, understand the Ark of the Covenant, the presence there that goes with military battles and conquest of the enemy. Then in verses 9, it also says, it repeats what has been said before. Lift up your heads, O you gates. Lift up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. And now there's another question from the gatekeepers. It says, who is this King of glory? So again, it's a repeat of what's said before. And there's another response of the ark bearers. The Lord of hosts, he is the King of glory. So the Lord of hosts, in other words, the lords of the armies of Israel, and God's with these armies of Israel to help them defeat the enemies. But here the emphasis is not just on God as this conquering warrior with the Israelites, where he conquers those forces of chaos and brings Israelite society to order, peace. The focus here is also on God as creator, who brought order to a chaotic world or physical world. So understand this psalm. It's a celebration of God or as king. It's called to worship God as king. He's brought order to the world. He's also brought order to the Israelite people by conquering their enemies. And this is the hymn of worship. And in the background, there's this also the Ark of the Covenant being present with God's people. That symbolizes God's presence and also for them that God was present to defeat their enemies.